All right, folks, let's talk about direct action. I'm super excited for this one. This is like a topic I have so much interest in. I actually defended some folks in some criminal defense cases involving direct action, so I also have like court experience. Before I get started, I would just like to acknowledge that I am on unceded shared territory of the Tsuminis and Penlicut Nation. I think it's really interesting when we talk about the law and illegality, particularly in the context of direct action, that we really acknowledge Indigenous sovereignty. Because when we talk about, for example, a blockade conducted by Indigenous people, it's very interesting to think about, like, is this really an illegal action, even if a colonial court has declared it to be, when people are on often unceded territory, or even if there is a treaty in place. Often the treaty was not signed by the representative person. Maybe the person didn't know what the treaty was. Oftentimes in the US context, treaties were voted on by all of the adult people who were designated as men by the colonizers. And so if there were processes for people who we now consider to be women or two-spirit folks to have decision making in their original cultures, they might not have been able to participate in the treaty making. So when we think about, like, when are things legal or illegal, it's important to ask, like, what legal system are we judging this up against? Because by Indigenous legal systems, I'm pretty sure we're all not supposed to be here. Okay, so let's get into it. What is direct action? Here's the definition from the American Heritage Dictionary, which I think is a great place to start. The use of immediately effective acts such as strikes, demonstrations, or sabotage to achieve a political or social end. Some key things that stand out to me about that is that you're not, like, appealing to somebody. Like, often a lot of political action, especially in the, like, quote unquote democratic context, involves, like, write to your legislator, try and lobby the president. It's been kind of interesting around here. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has been on the campaign trail, and there's been, like, a group of folks just, like, following his tour bus. I don't necessarily think that electorally oriented activism is always a bad thing or is never useful, but I think in some situations it becomes useful to actually do something rather than, continuing to appeal to folks that is essentially like a cult of celebrity and who don't necessarily have an interest in what you actually want to see happen. So here's a couple of examples of some direct action. Folks are probably familiar with a lot of the statue takedowns that took place last summer. And then also just wanting to highlight that mutual aid is a form of direct action. So when we provide for each other without intermediaries like charities or the government, and we just feed each other or house each other or provide each other with other things that we need, that's direct action, baby. One key thing I want to highlight is that direct action in most state contexts happens in the context of the state's monopoly on violence. What that means essentially is that when a government is established in a place, particularly a state government like the United States, or in this case, Hong Kong, what is imposed essentially is law, which is a way of saying that, like, people don't get to participate in violence and resolving conflicts at many levels at all anymore, and instead the state takes on that power. So the state implicitly has the sole permission to actually engage in violence. Hello? So the state has the sole ability to engage in violence, and it has pretty much total impunity to do it with, whether in a war with an outside state or against an outside population, or in the case of the police, against the population internally to maintain the rule of law, which, as we already saw with Indigenous treaties, can sometimes be suspect. So with all of that in mind, I'd love to jump into our first activity. So either with the examples that I may have mentioned before or other examples that you might know, I would love for folks to come off mic and say, maybe an example of some form of direct action that like you've heard of. If it's illegal, please don't tell me you participated because we're recording this. But yeah, can be the examples from before or any example of your choosing. And just tell me whether you think it was legal or illegal and violent or non-violent. You can just raise your hands or come straight off mic. You can also put them in the chat if you want. Legal observer of protests. Okay, Charlene, tell me more about that.
Sure thing. So here in when I lived in DC, I happen to be here right now. There will be a lot of protests down at the Capitol, protests at parks and different things like that. And so there were a group of us who were trained as legal observers to watch how the police interact with protesters. So it was like having the phone number to call for the attorneys written on your body, or like telling people what the phone number was, getting their contact information, sort of getting the badge numbers and the names of officers who were interacting with the protesters. But like we were hands off, but just trained in observing interactions, and like if people's rights were violated, they got arrested, like having them yell out this information so that we knew how to get in contact with them.
That's awesome. That's a really cool form of direct action. Where would you say that falls on this little chart?
For the observers, it will be legal nonviolent, I believe. It will fall in that kind of quadrant.
Awesome. Anybody else got an example?
So this summer, a group of folks in Omaha put pig heads on the front lawn of the police department, or it was the courthouse or police department. They're like literally a few blocks away from each other. After the suspected murder of somebody in the Revolutionary Action Party here in town. And that was illegal, and I think non-violent. Open to pushback on that though.
What's your thought process there? I would love to hear.
Yeah, so obviously illegal because like cutting off, having pig heads and like putting them on, I guess, I don't know, is that illegal? I don't know.
In some situations it would be qualified as vandalism, yes.
Okay, yes. Okay, that makes sense. And I think it's nonviolent because you're not harming anyone in the process. They weren't harming anyone in the process. And they already, like, they had a connection with folks who already had access to that product, that produce or whatever you want to call it. So they weren't like going and finding pigs and cutting their heads off, because that feels violent.
To the pigs, to be specific.
To the pigs, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example that you bring up, Kenna, because it highlights something that definitely is part of the conversation around direct action, which is whether property damage is a kind of violence. I tend to believe not, because, I think that human beings are what's important and stuff is not, but apparently that's up for debate. Does anyone have any other examples of direct action, or maybe like, can we talk about the examples of direct action that I've shown before? Like, where do we think something like a statue takedown falls? And people can put it in the chat.
Who took the statue down? I think that sort of directs the answer.
If it's the people versus if it's the government entity.
Got you. Okay, so I think if people took it down, then it's illegal nonviolent. Because it's just vandalism. And I mean, nobody really gets hurt with vandalism. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then like if we were to think about like violent forms of direct action, just to kind of fill in the boxes, something that comes up for me, especially in the context of talking about Indigenous folks or, like self-defense can be a form of violent direct action that might be justified. Another example of legal and nonviolent direct action that I really love to highlight is like forms of conflict resolution that don't involve the police. So some of the examples I really like to look at is some community groups like Incite Women of Color Against Violence, as well as the Hollow Water First Nation in northern Manitoba. Both have implemented similar systems where people sort of like non-violently intervene on situations of domestic violence or other kinds of interpersonal violence to make sure that the situation is safe.
Wondering, does self-defense fall into violent and legal, or is it hard to say because the state thinks that some forms of self-defense are legal and like some other forms of self-defense are not?
I think that's a great point, Molly, and I think that you're right, that it really depends on the state's interpretation of the context in which you're conducting self-defense. Also, it's interesting to think about the fact that like one form of direct action, I might put this in a different color, that we might think of is like police violence, in the sense that the state is itself imposing its own like desires and wants on people in a way that's totally legal, but is also obviously completely violent.
Yeah, it's interesting to like have these quadrants because, and I think you talked about this, where so often what's deemed violent versus non-violent is actually what the state thinks is legal versus illegal. So something like the vandalism or like arson of like a police precinct is like considered violent because it's illegal, but actually it's not. Like we probably wouldn't consider it violent because like no people were harmed in the doing so, but the public discourse around the destruction of property is often about violence because the state considers property more important than human lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's also the case with sabotage. Like if you look at some of the folks who have recently been convicted in connection with actions around No Dapple and the Standing Rock, a lot of folks were convicted of sabotage, terrorism, like serious offenses with 40-year plus amounts of time in federal prison for what? Like closing an oil pipeline for a day, blowing up a bulldozer. I think it's really important to highlight that, yeah, like the distinction between legality and illegality and violence and nonviolence is not like a moral distinction, right? Like we don't necessarily have to agree that these distinctions actually mean something about whether, these things are right or wrong, especially because, if you think about police violence or military intervention, these are some of the most legalized things in our culture. And, when we think about like the killing of George Floyd and how it took millions of people all around the world to get one person to face consequences. And as abolitionists, of course, we're not even sure if those were the consequences that we wanted. And in most of the situations where things like that happen, no consequences at all take place. So yeah, thanks Molly again for highlighting that like this isn't a moral compass, is just helping us situate ourselves in relationship to the law and to public opinion, basically. Cool. So just wanted to come up with some fun examples of direct action to take a look at. Shout out to Kenna for reminding me about this ACT UP action. Once again, reminding us all, Molly, punching Richard Spencer in the face is a great example of straightforwardly violent and illegal. Amen. The milkshake, we're not so sure. Anyway, thanks to Kenna for reminding me
And in the
about
nation's
this.
capital, more gay rights groups are speaking out, this time with a message of safety. A demonstration by members of the AIDS group ACT UP, known for disruptive protests designed to draw attention to the spread of AIDS. But this morning, something most incredible. They unfurled a giant political message for Senator Jesse Helms. The means for the message, a 15-foot giant condom, which engulfed his Washington, D.C. home. The group was protesting Helms' stance against AIDS education. Police were called to the scene.
All right. One of the things that I really think is interesting about this one in particular and other projects that are educational is that it may, in some situations, seem like it's not direct action, or the same thing may or may not be direct action depending on the context. So in a lot of actions by early LGBT rights groups, at least like early in our time period, what was being combated was erasure and lack of education. And I think that for a lot of LGBT related issues, that continues to be part of it. And so both for ACT UP as well as the group who did the action in the bottom right, the Lesbian Avengers, what they were doing had a really big component of just like making visibility, educating people about issues, right? Like this particular ACT UP action is about encouraging people to participate in safer sex and encouraging both lawmakers and also the general public and parents to realize that these are important things to educate the youth about, which I think is really cool. Another form of direct action that I personally love because I'm a gardener is Permablitz. This is essentially when individuals or communities come together to repossess public spaces, let's say a median, or I don't know what you call those things that are like between the sidewalk and the road, those like horrible lawns that no one takes care of. These are situations where the community, legally or illegally, depending on whether they own the land, quote unquote, takes this back and either uses it to grow food, uses it as a space for pollinators or for some kind of habitat, which I think is really awesome.
And in the nation's capital,
That's not what was supposed to happen. This is another video I was going to play of another form of direct action, which I really like, which are de-arrests, which I just want to warn you all are the most illegal form of direct action you can probably take, but it's fun to watch. I'll send this video around later. Okay, so now I want to talk about protests by incarcerated folks. In the prison context, there are many differences about how direct action takes place and how people can participate. In the one sense, there's actually a much larger context of direct action because a lot more things can be forms of direct action. Refusing to work can be a form of direct action in the prison context. Even some scholars theorize, which like I feel complexly about, like certain kinds of self-harm can be direct action in the prison context when your own body is being regulated in such a strict way. Even making the choice to, like demonstrably make that harm visible on your body can be a form of direct action. It's also much more difficult to organize direct action in the prison context between folks. Oftentimes incarcerated people's ability to come together in groups is very strictly regulated. You basically have to get approval for a club like it's high school. Incarcerated people's communication is monitored between them and people on the outside, and often among incarcerated folks in different prisons, it's impossible to communicate, or at least impossible to communicate legally. The other thing that's a big context in the incarcerated situation is that illegality is much higher. It's kind of the flip side of what I was saying before, that there's many more things that count as direct action, but that's because there are many more things that incarcerated folks are legally required to do, such as, working, responding to orders from corrections officers. So these kinds of things have also legal punishments in a way that certain forms of what we might think of as civil disobedience or demonstrative direct action on the outside would not really be illegal. So in that context, there are certain things that we should consider if we find ourselves in situations where we're supporting incarcerated comrades' activism. The biggest part is really the increased importance of monitoring and supporting them. It's really important when people are incarcerated for there to be eyes from the outside on them. It's basically one of the few things that can sometimes embarrass prison staff into doing the right thing. It means that, they're aware that there is, especially when there's legal observation, the possibility of real consequences in terms of court suits and settlements and things of that nature. But part and parcel with that is having phone zaps supporting incarcerated people's activism, or other ways of sending mass messaging into the prison and overwhelming them with the outside support and for the incarcerated folks. It's also just really important in the context of the monitoring to understand the enhanced danger. And, when incarcerated folks make the decision to engage in activism, of course, it's important to support that. But it's also important to think about what we ask incarcerated people to do inside of these contexts. And it's also important for that monitoring to last a long time. It's not enough just for incarcerated folks to, be monitored while an action is ongoing. Oftentimes people are subjected to retaliation long after whatever happened has lost the public spotlight, and often for reasons that are not aligned with what the prison claims is what they did wrong, for lack of a better way to put it. So let's talk strategy for direct action. Please excuse me for this messy slide. Clearly I had a lot of things to say. The main strategy, which you could probably tell throughout this slideshow, is, many people think that COVID might be over, which I tend to disagree with anyway, but at any rate, I better not see any of you people at a protest ever in my life without a mask on. Even if it is a legal protest, just get in the habit, and it's really, really important because, especially in connection with a lot of the actions that took place last year, many of the people who saw consequences were people who had a visible face that was posted to social media, either by them or by someone else at the protest. It's also really interesting because in the context of a court case that I worked on in law school, there was a mass arrest situation in a protest, and all of the people who ended up catching charges were people who, again, there was photographic evidence of them being there, and all the people who didn't catch charges were the people who the police were asked to identify them in court, and the policeman was like, oh yeah, that's like Lizzie Yen, and it was actually like Emily Zhang, and they were like, wow, that's not the person, like, you don't know. So as all of the memes around here show, your greatest asset against prosecution is the cop not being able to identify you when your court date comes. No face, no case. This also extends to other identifying stuff, not just your face, but like if you have tattoos, wear a sleeved shirt or wear long pants, etc., etc. Another really cool resource that's out there is the Vision Change Win Get Information. I have a link to it later, but they have some really cool strategic ideas about like how to organize yourselves physically in a situation, whether it's in an action or some kind of like protest or demonstration, so that people can be kept safe, so that they can be protected from either police or other kinds of, harassers and attempted interveners. And I think that's a really great resource. And then finally, the most important resource in the context of folks being arrested is jail support, which is displayed in the bottom right. So that's people showing up around either the police station or the jailhouse where people are being held, both providing support to family members and friends of the people who have been arrested, as well as monitoring the conditions in the jail or police station. And it just allows people to continue to be involved in what's happened after the action has ended, and is really important because the space in between like the exciting action and the few people who end up catching charges and, you know, ending up being incarcerated over it is very lonely if there's not jail support and other folks like really keeping things going. And that can be a really critical part of people's legal strategies. I didn't actually provide a link to it, but participatory defense is a really great form of direct action in that it takes the process of a person, you know, getting charged and going through trial and being convicted and like inserts the community back into that process, and often can be very successful because, you know, defense lawyers don't always have a lot of resources or time or energy. Thank you, Kenna, for that link. Yes, participatorydefense.org. Because defense lawyers don't always have the resources, time, energy, or frankly, in some situations, the caring to make sure that people are able to get the defense that they need. And the community should be able to intervene on that. Some other key stuff. Thank you, Charlene, for mentioning legal observers before. We love the NLG. We love folks who participate in legal observation. One of the most important things if you're at a big action is to find the person wearing lime green and introduce yourself to them. Make sure they have all of the resources that they have. You literally write them on your body is the most helpful, honestly, including the NLG hotline, which there will be some links to later. This person also can let you know about some of your rights in the context of interactions with police. We can talk about some of them. One of the most critical ones is knowing whether you're under arrest or not in a situation where you're confronted by the police. Your key phrase there is, am I free to go? If you're free to go, you get the hell out of there. If you're not free to go, they should give you your Miranda warning. Now, can anyone come off mic and recite it for me or tell me roughly what the Miranda warning is? I know y'all have watched Law and Order.
Is it you have the right to remain silent if you do not have an attorney will be appointed for you. There's other stuff, but that's anything you say may be used against you in a court of law.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. Honestly, I'm kind of grateful to police procedural shows for like at least that kind of legal education, because it's very useful information to know. You do have the right to remain silent. The one thing that is useful to know is that your Miranda rights only apply in the situation of an arrest. So if you're not under arrest, there's actually all sorts of really complicated case law about how if you try to invoke your Miranda warning too early, that can actually be used against you in court. Yes, Charlene, really complicated, 3 exclamation points. So all of this is to say, you say, am I free to go? And then if the cop says yes, you get the hell out of there. If the cop says no, you keep your mouth shut. And in many situations, it's useful to actually say, I am invoking my Miranda rights, whether they told you that you have them in that situation or not, which they should have. Another issue that's worth keeping in mind is when the police can search you. We'll probably do a whole policy study group later just about arrests, because this is such an important issue. Yes, as Charlene says, if you ask if you're free to go and the police are vague, you absolutely should ask again. The other thing that's worth noting is that unless you are under arrest, the police are not entitled to search you. This also is complicated because, as was popularized by some really good activism out of New York City, the police do have the ability to stop and frisk you in many situations. This is called a Terry stop. It's from a Supreme Court case called Terry v. Ohio that basically ruled that, like, if the police have reasonable suspicion that you have a weapon, they're allowed to pat you down, and that doesn't count as a search or as an arrest, which is classified as a seizure under Fourth Amendment law. But basically all of that is to say, like, you should absolutely not consent to any kind of searches, and the police should specify either that you're under arrest or that they actually believe that you might have a weapon before they touch you. And Obviously, in real time, it doesn't necessarily work out like that. But it's really important to remember all of these key things if you do end up in a situation where you're defending your rights in court, because all of these things can affect whether the evidence that the police or the prosecution is trying to admit against you can be used against you in court. And as I said, we'll probably do a whole policy study group on arrests. So for the purposes of direct action, you can check out some of the resource guides below. And just remember, as Charlene reminded us, always go find your legal observer if you're at a big action. Okay, so here's some of those resources. The Federal Defense Hotline for the National Lawyers Guild is a resource if you don't have a local NLG guild that has a hotline running. As I said, that Vision Change Win Safety Toolkit is really cool. There's a couple more resources from the ACLU and the NLG, basically explaining your rights in protest and police encounter situations. I also really like the Tilted Guide to Being a Defendant. I'll share all these slides in the chat shortly. As well as in the context of talking about community defense, talking about, you know, what that actually can look like. This collective out of Australia called Pachang has put together this resource called the Community Nonviolent Safety Handbook, which is really excellent. Basically, they conceptualize community safety as being about peacekeeping, peace building, and peacemaking. I think I said those in the wrong order, but basically conceptualizing that, like, first of all, there has to be a community of care. And then second, people can have certain like direct action interventions, like in the context of a protest, like marshals, like physically defending the people who are marching. And then also certain strategies for making peace between parties and conflict resolution, which I think are really cool. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and also stop recording.